Today, Learning Linux, June 21st. Wow. I shudder to think how many months or how many workshops we've done. Today, we're doing a desktop showcase, and I have selected XFCE to be able to share with you about one of my favorite desktops and why. XFCE came developed off of the common desktop environment. And most of you should remember when Orv took us through the KDE desktop, that it is also from the common desktop environment, the CDE. And so he said that that's where they kind of did a play on words and called it the K desktop environment, or some people call it the cool desktop environment. The XFCE had an actual name. It was the Xforms common environment. And Xforms was a toolkit that was used to produce this desktop. And XFCE is no longer using Xforms, but they kept the name. It was the name they had in the beginning. That's the name everybody knows. So XFCE, and it doesn't stand for anything. It's like on MASH, BJ Honeycutt doesn't stand for anything with the B or the J. It's just BJ. So XFCE is just XFCE. Don't try to make it into a one word like APCUG. It's APCUG, and it's XFCE. Now, it's interesting that Slackware gave it a neat nickname because of how it was created. They called it the cholesterol-free desktop environment, which is kind of what it's about with not being a heavy one. In terms of timelines, one of the things that's interesting, XFCE is actually the oldest of the desktop environments. And it was first released back in '97. But KDE, when Orv taught us, it's really kind of considered the oldest. It didn't come out until '98. And then GNOME, which is another of the big main ones, was in '99. And so why do we have this problem with XFCE not being the first or admitted to being the first? And that's because that Xforms toolkit that I had mentioned that it came from was not open source. And so they dropped it in '99 and went full open source. So a lot of people don't consider XFCE first production in the Linux world until '99. But actually it did come first in '97. But I'm happy that it decided to go FOSS that way. Whoops, wrong computer. I want to talk a little bit before we look at it and see what are some of the benefits of XFCE. And one of the benefits is low system requirements. And we talk about this desktop being great for older computers that don't have the horsepower that is required with some of these modern desktops. Now, just because XFCE works great on low resources doesn't mean it doesn't work great on the newer computers. You know, I've run it on my computers that were pretty powerful. You know, I had when it first was I built it, you know, a good processor and lots of RAM, and it works great on those computers. So even though most people say, well, if you're looking for one for older computers, go XFCE, I would tell you, doesn't matter what requirements you have, XFCE is going to be an excellent desktop. Another benefit of XFCE is it won't change up on you. It took a conservative approach 10 years ago or 20 years ago now when it came out in '97 and said, we are developing something that has what you need and it works. They don't have a development team that really is thinking about, well, we've always got to make this better and greater and grander. And a lot of people had trouble with that. GNOME went through that when they went from 2 to 3. KDE went through that when they went to Plasma. A lot of people didn't like all these big changes you were making. It was working fine. But somebody says, well, we've got to do something and make it, better. Mate, the purpose of Mate and even Cinnamon was that it was a preservative project. Mate is trying to preserve the GNOME 2 desktop environment with some new features. And Cinnamon did the same thing with GNOME 3. They kind of liked what GNOME 3 did when it came out with the new and greater, but they wanted to preserve some of the GNOME 2 stuff, so that's why we have that. But with XFCE, its vision is pretty much the same as what it was in the beginning, making a desktop that does what it wants to be or does what it wants you to do. Another benefit of XFCE is that it does what it does without animations and other flair. They have discovered that, all of that stuff that is coming out with some of these big heavy duty guns isn't really needed. And the way I kind of associate that is if you would go back to watching your shows and reading your Seuss books, and you go back to the Grinch, from his mountaintop, he just did not like the Christmas season with all of its music and all of its decorations and all of its presents and all of its food and all of that stuff. So he got rid of all of that. He got rid of all that flair. And what did he find out? Christmas still came. It came without the bows and without the packages and without the food and all of that. So that's the same thing with XFCE. It doesn't have all of those animations and other flares. However, being an open source Linux operation, you can swap things out. If you want to add some flares to it and some animations, and you know what you're doing, you can probably go out there and get that. The other benefit, it's a traditional desktop that can be modified. Most people, a lot of times in the reviews will say, it's a pretty drab looking thing and it's a pretty plain working thing, but that's kind of the whole purpose of the XFCE. It does what it needs to do and it does it very well. But XFCE being a component that has all these different parts that go together, if you have the tech knowledge, you can be able to swap out parts and bring this part in, bring that part in, and replace this part. And so, it can be not the true XFCE in the beginning, but it can be better than maybe if you need that. XFCE is very customizable. It's interesting, and it happens in the Windows world and maybe even in the Mac world. The developers of the computers and the desktop, the operating systems and the desktop environments, they kind of decide what it is that they think you should be able to change. We don't want you to mess with this, but you can mess with that. You can make changes in this, but you can't make changes in that. XFCE is very open that you can do a lot of extra changes. As we know in the Windows desktop world, you've got a panel, and about the only thing you can do prior to 11 is that you can put it on any side that you want. 11 just finally said, okay, all of you people that are complaining because you can't have it over to the left, well, let you do that now. But the developers had in their mind, You don't really need to move that. It's good where it is. So XFCE, very customizable, and you can then make it really what you want. Another benefit of XFCE is it exists under the radar. And what I mean by that is most of what you hear are people talking about the positives, the negatives of the big guys. You know, we're talking about what's better or what's worse. Is GNOME better? Is KDE better? Which one's worse? Which is this? Everybody's worried about them, and XFCE just goes right along and is doing what it does best. And the fact that XFCE users know that that's the focus, what the day in and day out user needs for an effective experience. So most people are doing it, so they just go about their business, and it's just great. It's been around forever and will be here in the future. It started back in '97, and we're getting ready for 23 and 24. And I think it's going to be around for a long time to come. There are other desktop environments that have come and gone because evidently they didn't have enough of a difference that got enough support. But these main ones, the GNOME, the KDE, the XFCE, now kind of cinnamon because it has improved on the GNOME 2, and the Mate because it improved on the GNOME 2. Along with XFCE, they're going to be here. You know, this is what traditional desktop environment users want. You know, a system that isn't a resource hog, can be made to fit your workflow. And I'm kind of one of these two people. I used XFCE, and then I moved on to something else. But more often, users might leave, but after experiencing the deluxe mega burger with everything possible on it, they come back to the simple hamburger cheeseburger that satisfies their needs without mess, without the hard, I can't even hold this. And so XFCE is sort of that way. You might go out and try KDE with everything that it has to offer, and then you realize, you know, there's a lot of stuff I don't use. My machine doesn't work quite as well, and you end up back with XFCE. So that means let's go take a look at XFCE. I didn't show the login because there's nothing, anything big about it. Now, the bar that you see,
So much for using the latest version of Zoom.
Yeah. All right, move it out. Okay, so that's going to be down there in the bottom, and it's not going to go away for a glitch in the Zoom part for at least, you know, the Zoom for Linux. That's the problem. All right, so I'm going to make this wrong hand. There we go. Now it's full screen. I didn't do the login screen because there's nothing big to that. I will also say that I have already gone in, because it's no big deal. It's the same for every computer. I have gone in and I've changed the size of fonts. So we'll find out whether it stayed when it went back, because I want you to be able to read everything. So this is the XFCE Desktop. And different with this version, this is the newest version with Ubuntu. So this is the Ubuntu XFCE called Xubuntu, and it is also the same one that Cal was using. This is the newest 24.4. So this is a short-term 9-month, but I wanted to be able to show off the XFCE. Now, as I look at my notes that I have to remember what I always want to say, the panel for XFCE is a single panel at the top. That's probably somewhat come from the old GNOME that was a top drop-down panel. But both Cinnamon and Mate put the panel down at the bottom, XFCE keep it up at the top. But of course, it can go anywhere that you want it. If we right-click and we go to panel preferences, you can see that right now I have one panel and I can add more. So if I add a second one, interesting, it just pops up here because it doesn't know where I want it. I can put this anywhere, the top, bottom. I can tell it that I want it to be a vertical one, so it goes over on the side. It might even stay right there in the middle, which is, doesn't make really much sense. So you create it and you locate it, and then there are lots of options that you can have with that panel. So you really can customize this a great deal. Under appearance, you can have a light mode or a dark mode. You can have different styles. I can have a solid color. This is a little bit different. So if I, for some reason, I can have my panels being colorful. I can automatically size them. That means I can start small, and then as I add stuff to that panel, it gets larger. Or I can say I want it full size to begin with. You can also have it opaque so that stuff goes through the backside. When you don't want a panel, you can just say that's panel 2. I want to get rid of it because I want to go back up to panel 1 where we have. And on this one, you can make the size. Right now it's locked, it can't move. So I can make it so it could move, but I would always hit it and drag it myself. Make the size that you need, the number of rows for icons. Now I can have 2 rows of icons if I want, or just the 1. Automatically increase the length, but right now it's full length. Under appearance, you can see what we had before. But here's another thing, that these are all the things that I can add to my panel. I can add a menu, but it's already up there, so there's no point in adding it up. That's an optional menu. But these are all things that you can include on that. I mean, these are all the things that are up there. There's the whiskers menu in the corner and all those things at the side. If I go to add, that's what I wanted to do. Here are all the extra things that I can add to the panel. Now, Cal was talking about some of those widgets and applets and stuff that you can, add sometimes to the desktop. I think that XFCE likes to have kind of a clean thing. So these are things that you can add to the desktop. One of the things that's really neat is this launcher, and I can put a launcher button and create my own personal menu that only has the programs that are my favorites added to that. I can have all sorts of other buttons, like the clock is up there, the clipboard manager, network monitor, how's the CPU doing, and the RAM. I can do a screenshot and have a quick action to there. Weather. So you can add a lot to your panel that in some operating systems you can't add to make it really what you want. So those panels in here are tremendous about what you can do. And there are even, I can make the panel, each piece transparent or whatever. So panels, as many as you want. And I'm going to do one thing I wanted to try, and I'm going to go, I have to go to blank spot. There we go. And I'm going to add a panel. And I'm going to experiment with this. And interesting enough, I can put two panels one above the other. Something I didn't realize they could do before. But you might find that you have a reason for putting side-by-side panels or otherwise. So I'm going to get rid of that one. See if Windows could do that. Remove that. Let's talk about the desktop itself. As always, we can right-click, and you can see that we have choices, and that font did not stay, so I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to go to recently used. I make lots of use of the search bar for finding things. Nope, it didn't stay. Shame on it. One of the things that Judy and I like is that everybody can see what's going on. There. That's it. Now you can see better. That's easy to do in Linux. I'm not quite sure about some of the other operating systems. But with this, you can see that we can create a launcher just to put on your desktop. I can create a folder. I can create an empty document. But what I want to get down to is looking at the desktop settings. And what I've noticed is that there's lots of backgrounds, but Mate that I do on my regular basis has a lot more and a lot more colorful ones. A lot of these are just kind of like drawings. But here's one thing that XFCE will let you do. I can put a different background on each workspace that I have. I can't do that in Mate, one or all. But in XFCE, if you want to do that. Now, to me, I've done that before because that lets me know which desktop I'm on. Because if they all look the same, you can't remember which one you're on and which one you're working on. But you can do that with this. How you want to work your menus and how you want your icons. You know, you can make these, I don't know where that thing came from. Making a size, what you want to see on your desktop. My preference is I like clear desktops because I like the pictures that I see on here. Now, one of the things on here is different is that under XFCE, there's no option for changing your theme or your mouse here. They've decided that that's something different. We're going to make something better by just saying, this is background for your desktop. You want to do something with, you know, fonts, go to fonts or go to that under appearance. The other thing that was very interesting with XFCE, we have been told by generations of developers, icons go in the top left corner. And we could drag them around. But XFCE says, you know, people have something a little bit different. they don't always want them maybe in the top left. I can put it anywhere focused on this screen. I can be in the bottom right and be vertical, or I can be at the bottom and I want my icons all horizontal. I don't know how many other desktops can do that. But that was tremendous. So everybody who wants to have it a certain way, you can have it in XFCE. Right. If we go to the menu, as I said, I'm really pushing for people learning to use the search box and tell the computer to find what you're looking for rather than you having to go through menus and menus. So I can type MOUSE and there's my mouse and touchpad. This tells me I'm using a virtual mouse, because I'm on a virtual machine, but you can control the size. But under behavior, typical things that you can do with double clicking and stuff like that. But under the themes, Cal showed us that the difference between the Ubuntu and the Mint, that the Mint had more mouse choices. This isn't the most I've seen, but you've got a good choices, and you've got your option that you can easily increase the size. So I want to do the all black one, and I can change the size, and then I should have a nice big mouse. Recently used, go back to the mouse. So there's a lot of choices on that. Maybe not as many as I've seen in other places, but how many different kind of mouses do you have to pick from? Other people want to talk about the file manager, and the file manager, you can get to it a number of different ways. You could type in FILE and get the file manager, or it's the Thunar file manager that comes default. And this is basically from Nautilus, which is the one that GNOME uses. And they've made a few tweaks to make it a little bit different, but they all kind of work the same. You've got your places, your devices, and your network. I've seen different versions where people say, well, I'm going to put the devices up at the top and then the computer and then the network. Okay. Themes, again, you can do, this one has little drawings on them. If we go to properties, not going to do that there. One of the things that has changed in Thunar, and that I didn't use it before, and that's probably why I left XFCE for a while, is that I like the split screens where you can work in most of the desktops, have two panels and be able to move things back and forth, copy, paste. In the newest version of Thunar and XFCE, that's theirs, we now have panels. And one of the interesting things is that they have it so that the panels don't have to be 50-50. This was not in the current version of Thunar. It is in the newest version, which is 4.18, which is this newest version of XFCE. Because of that, I might very well come back to XFCE because it has the split pane. I don't have to install. I could install a different file manager, but I'm going to the point, why install another one? But now that this works, it can be very, very good. So typical file, except it's added that plus the streaming here. Under the view, you know that you can do it. I do most of mine part with detailed view. There we go. And I do it with the lists, and that's nothing different than anybody else does on theirs. If we go into the start menu, this is the whiskers menu, start menu. The slogan or the mascot for XFCE is a mouse. It's been that way from the beginning, and so that's why they call their applications menu whiskers, because the mouse has whiskers. But it is the typical Linux version, not a Windows, because it's, excuse me, categories, and then within the categories, then you'll find all the different programs that you will have here. You can edit this menu and show what you want in it and not show what you don't. For example, there's a section called development, and you can see how it's not in my list. I'm not a developer. I don't need development. But if I wanted to, I could not hide it. What's happened is that there's a program in here called Python. I don't do Python, and I've got it hidden. So therefore, the development folder says, well, there's nothing here to show, so I don't need to show. One thing I thought was interesting is when I went to here first and you go to games, there are 3 games. But when I came to here and looked at the games menu, there's a ton of them. It's just that somebody decided, well, we'll let people see those 3 games. So you can come in here if you're like to play games, and you can come in here and turn them on so that you can don't hide them. So the menu for your programs are very customizable as well. Oh yeah, I'll save that way. If we look at appearance, you saw that Cinnamon and both Mint and Ubuntu had a little bit, especially in Cinnamon, a fancier way. All we see right here is the name of the style, whereas in Mint, you got to see examples of it. Same thing with the icons. You can kind of see the icons, and there's a lot to choose from, but you can add more. You can go out on the internet to XFCE probably and say, I want more. These aren't enough. There's where I came to get the font and change the size. And then here is where you can change the menus and the buttons to what you want to see. I want to see the images on both the buttons and the menus. I don't necessarily want to hear sounds. You know, there are sounds that when you click on this and click on that, you hear sounds. Scaling is where I can make everything twice as big. So if I had a vision problem, I could make things twice as big without having to go in. And Microsoft does that as well. Now I got to get down. I got it too big. Now I got to figure out how to get out of that. That one scrolls, but that one. All right, so we'll do the tab way. So if you haven't learned tabs, now I don't want to read the manual. That's fun.
Try holding the control button while you scroll.
Yeah, I got the control button down, and that's what I need to be able to do is to get went down too far. Ah. So there we got, it was kind of too big now. Try it once more. Because that'll scroll down. Oh, let's see if I can do a. Yep, tell them to go to appearance to do the scaling. There we go. Had to make the window the size. All right, so it can get big on that. Let's take a look at some of the default programs. And if we go to DEF, spelled right. I will say that offerings for default applications within XFCE isn't as great as in Mate. Mate will let you pick a number of different applications, but they just had, well, when you do the internet, what do you want for browsers and mail? If you want utilities, what do you want for file manager and your terminal? But when you go to others, there's where you can go down and deal with all 866 file types and determine what your default's going to be for those particular types of programs. So if they have them pre-set up for most of them, it's there, you can see it's the default, but you can. So again, XFCE has a ton of customization that you can do with it. And this computer will run, if I was just running it real, a lot faster. And my big machine with enough power, it would run whichever. One interesting things I wanted to show you in the disk program. We've talked about this program before. This is what shows you everything. It says I've got my virtual, my hard drive and my CD-ROM drive, but they're virtual ones. If we go into this one, what I want to show you, and this is the same thing that you kind of saw when Orv did his command to show you the partition table. This is the GUI one. This is done by the default. And you will see that partition 1 is the BIOS boot. Partition 2 is that EFI boot part. When you let the computer set it up, or the installation program set it up, nowadays, because of the GPT and because of what stuff Microsoft has done, it will automatically create a boot EIF and a boot partition. We have talked about going into setting up your operating system and other. and setting up the partitions. The problem is when you do it yourself, you aren't always offered the UEI to be able to add to it. And then when you try to reboot your computer, because your BIOS is the way it is, it won't start up. So what you have to do kind of is a roundabout way, set it up the normal way with the GPT, make sure you can get the EFI. Then you can come through and get partitions for like data, like I like to have it. But I wanted you to see that it sets it up that way with the UEIF. If we look at the software manager, because we saw that earlier today too. This takes a second because it has to update itself to see what's out there. You'll find out that this is pretty much similar to the Ubuntu and the GNOMEs. Tells me I have updates. It gives me a featured one. It gives me very limited number of categories, but inside, everything that has to do with work is there, social there. And then here's some editor's choices for office work. Because this is Xubuntu, the Ubuntu XFCE, you will find that they really push for snap packages here. So that's another difference, like between the Mint and the Mint XFCE and the Ubuntu XFCE. Ubuntu is going to be pushing for snap packages, and Mint is going to be kind of offering the flat pack ones. I thought it's interesting that Thunderbird is installed on here, but when you go to Explore and say Thunderbird, it pops up the snap one. So that tells you can have two different programs running. You can have the deb package and the other one running at the same time. So nothing much different, except it's more plainer. Separates can't see what that one is. Oh, input sources. Now I don't need any of that. If I wanted to just get fonts and more fonts and then get hardware drivers, you can click on installed and find out exactly what's installed here. So this is good because I haven't installed anything extra, but these are all the programs that came with XFCE, an application finder, which is just like that shortcut search bar, but it's a program that just pops up a window. There's your PDF program. There's your file search program. Disk we were just in. There's your document scanner, comes with it. Archive manager for your zip files. Came with Firefox, comes with GNOME because it's based off of GNOME, but then the XFCE makes their modifications. Here's another big thing. Years ago, the whole feature of XFCE was lightweight. It did not come with an Office suite. It came with two programs. Abby Word was for word processing, and Numeric was a very simple, plain, good, like spreadsheet program. But over the years, XFCE has worked it out that you can still have all of these programs on a lighter weight one. So now it comes with LibreOffice already installed, which then makes it even more. I use LibreOffice. Thunar is now acceptable. I may be going back to the XFCE version of Mint. There's the music program, same one as Cal showed us earlier with Rhythmbox. Their image view is one that they've kind of put together. Resetterero, I can't say it. There's the Thunar. And these are some, like I said, here are the different packages. Everything's an XFCE 4, and so you can explore that. So software on that. If we take a quick look, make this, what comes with it, lots of accessories, screenshot programs, number of games, the graphics. It comes with GIMP, which wouldn't have been what normally would have come with XFCE, but XFCE is developed so well that even though it is designed and everybody talks about it being for an older computer, the way it's put together, we can now run GIMP on there. On the internet, Firefox is its default browser along with Thunderbird. Multimedia, the media player is Parole. Rhythmbox is for music, and they still include a CD burning program. There's under Office, as we saw, lots of settings and a number of system. Now, if we go to SETT Settings Manager, you can see what we saw in the slides. This would be very similar to what you would see. I think that XFCE gives you quite a lot more than some of the distributions in terms of what can you change and modify. So all in all, my feelings about XFCE is that it is one of the better desktop. It is not fancy. It doesn't have everything that KDE has, but every time I go to KE, there is so much there, I get overwhelmed and I'm going, get me back out of here. Take me back to Kansas. And so there you've got it with the XFCE. So Judy, we'll jump back to see if I can get out of here. Interesting. I've done the stop sharing, but my screen does not come back to your screen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, see, I only have one computer, so I don't have those kinds of problems.
Yeah.
Anyway, John says low system requirements to me generally means memory and or speed. What about 32-bit systems?
I think we'd have to go look it up, that XFCE, well, no, it depends on the distribution. XFCE is running on Ubuntu. Ubuntu doesn't support the 32-bit. So this wouldn't work on 32-bit. But there are, I think I saw the list of like 23 different distributions that XFCE is the default desktop. So going to my favorite distro watch, go to distro watch, say, I want to do XFCE, I want 32-bit, and distro watch will tell you, here are the Linux distributions that are running XFCE and support 32-bit.
Thank you. How can I install XFCE over or in place of my Mate desktop?
You do not in place of or over, you add it to. And what I mean by that is you would go into your software store on Mate, go find the XFCE 4 package, which gets everything, and then you would install it. When you reboot at the login screen, and you can't show the login screen when you're not logged into Zoom, so I can't show it to you, but maybe I'll do a picture. When you go into the login screen, there's a button somewhere that when you click on it, it'll say, do you want to do Mate or do you want to do XFCE? And so you can choose which one you want to do each time you log in. I have one on this laptop and I forgot that I did it, I guess, that when I click on that button, it says, do you want to do Ubuntu or do you want to use Mate? And it also with Ubuntu, it says, do you want to do Ubuntu Wayland or do you want to use Ubuntu the old way? So that's what you do. If you wanted to replace it, you just reinstall your operating system with what you want, separate your data files. But you can do that. The only problem is your actual hardcore operating system is a mix now. It has both Mint stuff and it has both XFCE stuff. Doesn't usually affect it as too bad, like it does when you do KDE. If you install some KDE programs, they will download a bunch of KDE stuff. That's why flat packs with KDE things are going to be really good because it doesn't have to install extra stuff. It's already there.
Isn't UEFI replacing the BIOS on newer computers? Is the BIOS for support for older hardware?
I'm not a developer. All I know is that Microsoft messed things up when they started telling everybody had to go UEFI. That caused a lot of problems in the beginning because they, made it so that you couldn't run Linux until you had to go in there and jimmy things up. But I think it's probably here to last because the manufacturers are putting their BIOS. The BIOS is going to be there because that's the whole thing of in the computer, but they add the UEIF stuff in there.
Thank you. And Mr. Drew is not with us, so you can look at it positively as you already have something booked for July.
Yes.
But I think he was also going to do this in May, but we'll just hand carry my, and I did look, I searched for, problems with this Patch Tuesday, and nothing jumped out at me that the end of the world has come with many computers, so.
Yeah, I think my personal, and I'm not a Windows expert, is that it was a faulted update. Something glitched, power glitched, something happened while it was going to cause it to not do it right. And that's, so I said I've seen that kind of thing happen and forcing it to shut down, and then it had to start up, shake its head, get the cobwebs out. Then it goes through the whole update. Don't turn off your computer, and then finally it comes back to life. But I think that's what it was. It was a glitch in the update for him. Well, so yeah, so if his schedule works out in July, he will be back doing it, because that's a program I wanted everybody to see. It's a fantastic program. I've known about it for a while, but I've just never jumped into it. So I was glad that Drew was going to show us all, and I said, nope, okay, I'll get into it.
And the name of that program is?
ADE Connect.
And
even though it connects your phone to your desktop or your laptop, so that you can do everything on the phone from your desktop.
Is that just for Linux, or is it for Windows and Mac too?
You'd have to ask a Windows Mac person on the the second or fourth Wednesday of the month and see if they can tell you.
Oh, I'll just, what it. Anyway, we are open for questions on anything your little heart desires. And John's going to close the chat box now. And I can go from 3 windows open to only 2.
Yeah.
Way cool.
There we go.
And you have your raise hand button directly on your toolbar, your Zoom toolbar. You no longer have to click on reactions to find it. Tim from Chicago Computer Society, you are on.
One little addition for the raised hand. Anybody who is using a magnified view of their desktop, such as scaling to 125, 150, etc., all the icons in the center of Zoom screen at the bottom do not show up, but you have on the right side a More option. Click the More and you'll find the raised hand in More. But part of the reason why also brought up here yet. I liked John's presentation on XFCE. I have that on some other systems, both Mint and Ubuntu versions. But one of the things is when you right click on the taskbar and go to panel preferences, if you unclick the lock panel option, then move your cursor to the extreme right or extreme left of the panel, you will get a vertical rectangle. Put your mouse pointer on it, click and drag your whole panel to any side you want to. And then when you're done, you can go back into the preferences and put the lock back on. I prefer, John, I see prefers having the panel at the top. I prefer at the bottom. So that's it.
Right. Another thing that I need to, while I think of it, the right click, you can go in with XFCE, and on the right click preferences, you can check and add your applications right there. So anywhere on the screen, I can right click, there's all my programs. I don't have to always go up to the top corner and click the menu. I can even get that off my screen because all I do is right click and there's all my menus right there anywhere the mouse is. So I find that as a real good feature too.
Right click is one of the best things in the whole world.
Absolutely.
Kurt Trout from Twin Cities in Minneapolis, you are on.
That was a mistake. I'm sorry.
Oh.
All right, we'll switch to Ron.
And I don't know what club he's with. Ron, what group are you with?
I belong to a couple. I was with Semco, but I've moved to Massachusetts from Michigan.
Burr.
Oh, I also am with the one in Virginia, near Washington, which is where I used to live. So,
cool.
Not with Semco anymore. Anyway, John, thank you for that presentation. I have a question about your headset and microphone. If it's one that a brand and model that you are particularly pleased with, I'd like to know what it is.
I'm not totally pleased with this because it hurts my ears. This is a Plantronics. I got it on sale at Staples years ago.
Yeah.
And it's pretty good, but it's not, I don't like for a long time. I need to go find a much better one that fits around the ear, so it's not. That's why a lot of times, if you're watching, you'll see that I'll adjust that. But in terms of the functionality, it's great because I can swing the mic up and it turns it off when I have to cough real quick, and it works real well. It works with Linux and it works with Windows. I can't say for Apple, but yeah.
Gee, thanks.
Thank you.
Back in the day, 1,000 years ago, we had Plantronics in our the boardroom. One of those things that kind of like an octopus, and they are expensive. So I'm glad you got it on sale.
Oh, I don't do anything unless it's on sale.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, I do have that I haven't used here. I have a very good microphone I got to start using. That's a desk mic or one that hangs. I'm going to get it so I can hang over the top, be like a radio studio. But I use the headset because it makes things so that it doesn't pick up extra noise.
And your son gave you that, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's a very good one.
Cool.
I'll take this time too to I forgot to do my public service announcement after my presentation by saying that if any of you are using a different desktop environment, we'd like to know about it. we'd like to know what are some of the neat things about it that you like. What are some things that are a little bit different? There's a dozen out there. And I have a list that we have for Ubuntu. And now that Ubuntu added Cinnamon, it makes it now like 12 different ones. So if you use a different desktop environment that's out there, we'd like to know about it. Share it with us. If you use a different distribution than our traditional Ubuntus and Mates, we really want to know about it, because I'd like to know, somebody explain to me what these other distros like Arch and Gentoo and Slackware and OpenSUSE and Fedora, and there's a couple of others, you know, what makes them different, and what do you like about it? Why are you using it than the other? I can't do that. I can stumble through desktops and get one and play around with it a while, but we need some people to share, because that's the beauty of Linux. In Windows, I'm sorry, folks, Windows workshops can be boring because there's one desktop and there's one version of the operating system, as opposed to Linux that has, you know, dozens of distros and dozens of desktops. There's a lot to talk about. So, you know, if we're going to be able to continue, we need some new material and some new people. So again, you can write to me, Jay Kennedy at apcug.org, or Judy J. Tallor at apcug.org, and say, hey, I'm using this desktop. I'll be glad to share. And you can see that wasn't a perfect demonstration. It had glitches in it. So we don't mind glitches. We're not a top 100 Zoom channel. We're just here for our club members. Richard.
And Richard is from the Melbourne PCUG in Australia. They are
asleep. They're asleep.
APCUG's largest computer club, and they are the largest group in Australia. I read that on their website last night.
Yes. If I'm moving a user from Windows to Linux, which version would you recommend where to move them to, so I don't confuse them with all these different options?
Is that a Bill answer? Because Bill just did that at Christmas time.
Well, he did, but that's because we were doing Mint, so he went with Mint. I think, Richard, there's a number of different ones that would fit the bill. That's a debate. I think Mint is a very good one to switch to. They say that the Cinnamon Mint is close to being a Windows desktop, and so that would be, you know, a good one. I don't see that Mate is that much of a problem to switch from a Windows person to a Mate desktop. And, you know, XFCE was a very basic, easy one with the menu system. But I don't know if anybody else has better, you know, recommendations, but I read, oh, here's a list of the 5 best desktops for Windows users. And, you know, so nobody has a single one, but maybe some people have recommendations. If you do, let us know.
And Richard, I'll send you the link to the presentation that Bill gave, because from a Windows user's point of view, that's how he changed over to Linux. And he thought, this is how I do it in Windows, how am I going to do that in Linux? And he made that so understandable for anybody who's thinking of moving from Windows to something else.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any other questions? You know, we love questions. We can make up the answers if we don't know, but John, in some strange set of armor.
Darth Vader.
Oh, now that I can see that. Oh,
made out of electronics.
I know, my gosh, that's so cool.
Anyway, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay. Hey, so I have a friend who just installed Kubuntu on an i3 Intel machine, and it boots up fine to the desktop, but before it boots up, he gets these error messages. And I do have a screenshot. If I could share my screen, I could show everybody, and maybe somebody could explain what's going on, or tell me how to tell him to get rid of these error messages. So if that's possible for me to share, I would be.
Yep, go ahead and share it.
Okay, thank you.
Because I've got an answer.
Okay, well, here is the message he gets. Now, this hangs in there, John, for about 2 minutes, and then it boots up to the desktop, and he says it works fine after that. But every time he turns the machine off and turns it back on, this is what he sees. Now,
here's what I've been taught. I've been taught, stop looking at that screen.
Okay.
And what I've been taught, whether it's 100% right or not, and some of these other people who are more of an expert than me, is that sometimes as the computer is loading and all that thousands of lines of code, some things start before they should, causing an error message. Later on down the line, what it needed gets started. And so when they try it again, no problem.
Okay.
And, you know, my answer is, if you don't look at it and the computer boots up and everything runs fine, who cares what it says there if the computer is working?
Well, the only issue he has is it seems like it takes several minutes for it to finally get to the desktop. And I don't know whether it's because of some of these error messages that I'm showing here, or, you know, I'm not an expert, so I don't know. So if anybody knows, you know, anybody that's on the call that knows what these might be or how to correct them, I would appreciate any help.
Yeah, my answer, but then anybody else can answer, is my guess is part of it's KDE trying to run on an i3 older laptop.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
It doesn't have much for graphics, and I assume he's running 4 gigabytes memory.
I believe so. I'm not.
Yeah, that's for KDE. That's it's so what it's having probably to do is swap out kind of like virtual space, because it doesn't have enough room. And maybe it has to, instead of using a GPU, it has to put more in the CPU rather than the graphics. So it's jamming up everything on the CPU. It doesn't have an extra chip to help it. And so it's essentially, I think it's swapping out. And
he does
what
have,
John said is, and that's why it's taken a long time and so forth. Extra memory might help.
He does have 8 gigs of RAM.
Does have 8 gigs? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's an i3. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't run an i3 in a while, so I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate your input.
This is Sergi. I have a couple of comments.
Yay. Hi, Sergi.
Hey, how's it going? So I've seen the 2 ACPI messages in the middle on my machines. They're just warnings. They can be safely ignored. The 2 messages before that and the 2 messages at the bottom I have not seen. But as John commented, if this is not explicitly causing you a problem, then it probably is not a problem. Notice that all of these messages are appearing within a quarter second of your boot. Therefore, this is about the kernel initializing itself. It cannot have anything to do with virtual memory, because this is way before any of that stuff is turned on. All of this is going on in physical memory.
Okay.
The other thing that you can do is there is a command line command called systemd-analyze that you can use to get a report on what is taking time during your boot sequence. So my suspicion is that that your boot slowness or boot pause has nothing to do with these messages. The command is systemd-analyze. You should be able to Google Linux, get a report of boot time or something like that. Or Linux troubleshoot boot.
Yeah, very good. I appreciate your help.
And that should allow you to determine which component is actually taking a lot of time during boot so that you can actually focus the solution on that problem. Because I don't believe that these messages have anything to do with it. But upgrading to a newer kernel might help. If you are running with 4 gigs of memory, you may be slow running a bunch of applications, but you certainly should not have any problems booting.
Yeah, he said once it boots, he said the machine is zipping along just fine.
Yeah, I would not expect that you would, with 4 gigs of memory, that you would have any serious limitations unless you loaded it up with applications.
Yeah, he's got 8. He has 8 gigs of RAM. So
okay, that should be plenty for most, except for most memory-intensive application mixes.
Okay, I appreciate your help.
Sure.
Let me stop sharing.
Ooh.
Okay, Harmon, you were next in line.
Yep, unmute yourself, please.
Okay, with most Ubuntu operating systems, as the computer begins to boot, repeatedly hit the escape key, you get a menu where you can fix a lot of the problems that they're having.
Thank you. Short and sweet and to the point. I just was thinking, Google the error message and see what it says, but that's me. Tim.
On the person that had a friend with the problem on an i3, the first 2 lines are microcode features of the CPU that suggests that they have an older version CPU. Those are very modern ones that are listed. It's not going to cause a problem.
Thank you. Harmon, do you have more to say? And I stepped on your toes?
Well, pretty much. It's got a memory tester. I remember that. It's got a bunch of advanced settings where you can clean up and fix broken links from the packages and stuff like that. And basically, it usually works out pretty well.
Thank you. And Tim was there and he went away. So this is the Linux help desks now.
Yeah.
You still have Andy.
Yep.
Andy Kerrigan.
Hey, folks. Just throwing in 2 cents from New Jersey on that the boot messages. In addition to what Sergey was talking about, the first 2 lines point to boot errors. From playing around with a lot of older machines, the first thing I would do is go into the BIOS and see if those settings are turned on, if they're enabled in the BIOS. And the other thing is, if you're on an older machine, there's a very real probability, like on a couple of my machines, where there was a BIOS update put out by the manufacturer. So 2 things to check that have nothing to do with Linux, but it's all hardware related. So turn on the settings for virtualization, and the other thing that was popped up there, and also see if there's an update for the BIOS. That's it, 2 cents. No change required.
Okay.
And over to Jim from Vernon, BC, British Columbia, and I like your new website. Unmute, please.
I was recently given a Dell Inspiron, and I tried loading Linux onto it, I can load it on my tower computer, no problem, but it says operation system not found when I go to load it into this Dell Inspiron. It's got 8 gig of RAM. It's got a terabyte of storage, but somebody told me it had to be done in a legacy boot. But when I run the Linux through the Baleen etcher, I think it just puts in a BIOS or a UEFI instead of the legacy boot.
Yeah, that's kind of like the problem that we're getting into, that you've got to do, your hard drive's got to be set up with the GPT partitioning thing, which then requires a boot partition, then the EFI. If the operating system has been installed and your computer says, I don't find one, it's trying to boot from something or some part else, of partition.
Yeah, I was trying to boot it off USB after Baleen etcher.
Okay.
And that's when it can't find it. Like I'm on Windows 10 right now because that's what's in the computer.
Yeah, it's in the BIOS that you might have to go back to the legacy. You might have to make sure that secure boot is turned off, because if secure boot is on, it might block it from going to the USB.
No, I was able to point it to the USB, and that's when it can't find it. So I'm thinking I have to change the boot that Baleen etcher's putting on the USB. Because I press F12 and it comes up, and where do you want the boot from? And I say USB. That's when it says operation not found.
Okay. Do you know whether you've got secure boot turned off in the BIOS?
No, I don't.
Yeah, you might have to go in there and turn that off, because even if you're telling it to go to the thumb drive, your BIOS says, nope, we're not going to go to any drive other than the internal drive.
Oh, okay.
Because, it's a security thing.
Yeah, I'll try that then.
Because I don't use Balena as much. Yeah, but I use Balena, and usually it just makes it, and we just plug it in and it goes. But check that BIOS part.
Two things I would try.
Good.
I've gotten that message before. You can put the USB, go to the BIOS and make USB the default boot.
That's what I tried doing.
Move it from the second up to the top. The second is, do you have two sections where it has the USB hard drive, and then it has the EFI boots?
It just, it doesn't come up with a UEFI boot thing. It just says mass storage, like the hard drive, the USB, and I think there was something else in there, but somebody said I had to use a legacy boot rather than the BIOS or UEFI.
Yeah, and that would come
so
from your
Windows. Generally speaking, okay, I generally make them with, I don't use Balena etcher, so I make them with Mint and others where they put both types on there. Because if it was a Windows 10, it was definitely set up to boot GPT. But you have to have your USB able to boot both ways. I'm just not familiar with Balena etcher enough.
Yeah, it doesn't really come up and say what kind of boot do you want. Like I said, it works on my other Windows 10 on my tower, but on this Dell, it doesn't.
Oh, and that's the magic word, Jim. It's a Dell. I'm sorry.
I would check, go to the tower and its BIOS and see how it's set up for boot, and maybe on the tower secure boot is turned off. And
yeah, you also have to enable legacy boot. There's another section in the BIOS for Dell where you can enable legacy boot. Even though it can, you have to turn it on.
Oh, okay.
See, told you. Mike, living the good life in Camarillo.
Hello to all, and many thanks to all the speakers. You put a lot of work into your presentations and imparted quite a bit of knowledge. My question is regarding the terminal, and it might be considered rhetorical, but maybe I'll get a little bit closer to a real life answer. My background is I started with DOS, the C prompt, and I checked out a book from the library and did every DOS prompt in the book, every command. And what I liked about that is I could undo anything that I had done, whether it was to share a drive, etc. My problem in Linux is, can somebody tell me, is there some way to undo what you do when you make a command through the command prompt in the terminal in Linux? Now, I know you can install programs and uninstall, but sometimes when I go through these websites and I make these changes to my computer, I don't think there's any way to get back. Is that the case? And if it is the case, is it like 50% of the time? I want to get back sometimes, and I have a hard time getting back when I put a command in the command prompt.
Since our terminal guy isn't here, does anybody have an answer?
Sure, this is Sergey. I can try this.
Okay.
So it entirely depends on what you're doing. Right? If you're, for example, if you're going to go delete and wipe out some files or remove a disk from your system, you're not likely to be able to get it back. On the other hand, if you're doing something simple like installing a program, you can uninstall it. So I cannot think of a generic answer to your question, except for maybe in the case of a virtual machine. If you're using VirtualBox, one of the things that you can do is take a snapshot of your machine and then restore it later.
Oh, so thank you for that suggestion. I forgot all about that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just, I'm sure there's a lot of folks like me out there that are poking around, and you get these command strings that are like 2 lines long, and it's like, whoops, how do I get back?
I mean, just because it's 2 lines long or 10 lines long doesn't mean that it actually does anything destructive. This command line could be just reading information from your computer, or on the other hand, it could be wiping out random things in random places, right? Linux does absolutely give you the power to do damage.
Absolutely.
But one of the ways to be able to experiment and recover is to use VirtualBox snapshots.
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding me about that. I forgot it. And like I said, most of the time, just because you reverse the action of a fly swatter doesn't put the fly back together.
Nope.
Yeah.
Sure does.
Yeah. And the other thing for non-virtual machines would be to make sure you're using time shift so that if something goes really bad, you can jump back before you did that and get your computer back to in time to what it was working like you wanted it to work. So
now if I only had space on my hard drive, I'd do that every time.
Well, one of my answers would be to use a live USB, which is not going to mess anything up. And you just turn it off and unplug it. When you plug it back in, it's back to the original condition.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you to all.
Yeah.
And Mike, I'll send the question to Orv. He's over in Simi Valley. He can just kind of turn your way and shout it out to you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Harmon, you're on again.
Okay, back in the day, when you get an error message like that, the computer is trying to find the A drive, which is your floppy drive, which you do not have, and you have to go into the CMOS and let it know that you don't have it and uninstall it from the menu. And you need to save and exit. However, you also need to change out your CMOS battery because evidently it's not holding the settings.
Thank you. Richard, your turn.
Just to comment on the Dell machine. I mean, a few years back, we were having all sorts of trouble with the Dell machine and spoke to Dell support. Eventually, the solution was update the BIOS. and that cured our problems.
Sometimes that's it.
Yep. Every time I called Dell with my less than happy laptop, it was always my fault when it wasn't my fault. Any other questions? Nobody behind you with a question, John? Okay.
Yep.
I think our Linux help desk is closed.
It's been a good one. We still have one more Wednesday workshop for June. And so we hope to see a lot of you back for it. And then half of this year is over. Unbelievable. So enjoy your longest day of the year today. And that's when the kids don't want to go to bed at all. And again, follow material will follow up at some point in time when it all gets produced and all the post-production stuff gets done. So thank everybody for attending. Thank Bill for helping out, Judy for coordinating questions, and Cal, thank you always with very detailed and great graphics for presentations. And hopefully we'll be back next month with Drew talking about the KDE Connect. I'm going to be back with a very unique, different kind of a distro. It's not a different distro as in it's not a Debian based, but a very unique take on installing and running it. So I'm going to share that next month. And if you have any questions for our questions of the month, or if you have a, well, no, Drew will be doing the software of the month. But if you have software that you'd like to share with us, like Drew is, let us know and we can add you to another month. And then we find out some new software that we can try.
Cool.